You have a board that is all about decision rights. You got a bad board. You got to figure out how can you take governance and turn it to not be something about decision rights, but really be about stewardship. Look, boards are noses in, fingers out. All good board members understand that. You're not management. But you can still show up in different ways. If you're a board that's all about governance and control and authority, bad board, especially for a startup. It's not helpful. What you want is a board that are trying to be good stewards of the future of the company. It becomes more of the learning, guiding, teaching.
Hey everybody, this week I'm joined by Claus Jensen, a technologist turned storyteller. Claus has spent the last 10 years working on healthcare transformation at Teladoc with virtual care at scale, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and CVS Health. His sweet spot is transition and growth in the intersection between business, technology and people. Claus, an absolute pleasure to have you on the Healthtech Podcast. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Thanks for the invitation.
Very well, very well. Yeah, very much looking forward to getting into this. You've got a fascinating career, C-suite, boards, multiple companies. You've seen the health tech space or continue to see the health tech space from so many different angles. And I think you're going to have some really interesting perspectives. You also hold a Guinness World Record, if I've read about your information online correctly. So there's, I can leave the audience wondering what that Guinness record might be. We can probably touch on that towards the end, maybe. But yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the Healthtech Podcast. Whereabouts are you speaking to us from today? Where are you based?
Right now, I'm sitting in an office in Austin because I'm about to embark on the next chapter in my healthcare journey. You have a plan as you get a new one, so I'll be working out of Austin. I'll be working out of Austin for a couple of years. We can talk about that.
Oh, very interesting, very interesting. Well, we'll get into it. So, I think it'd be great for our audience if we can get the full story. So, by all means, why don't you tell us the long version? Why don't you start at the beginning? Yeah, I mean, I know a little bit about it from what I've read. It looks fascinating, but yeah, I'll let you tell your story.
Let's see. Why don't we start with the tidbits that you can't read online? Where does a career start? I think in my case, it started when I was probably in the 7th grade, and that was when computers became a thing. Like, we didn't talk about laptops or PCs. It was a computer, so it was a thing. I got my very first personal sort of device. It was a Sinclair CX81, and I was in the 7th grade, and I was a whopping total of 14 years old. Right? So that's a long time ago. 4K of RAM. K, not megabytes. You can't imagine what that looks like. It wasn't very big. It was like this big. So I got into this whole thing and what can you do with digital technology? And then in the 8th grade, my Latin teacher, which has got nothing to do with computer science, her husband was the first graduating class of computer scientists in the country of Denmark. And on the spot, I decided that was what I was going to do. So I stuck to it. So that was actually what I ended up doing. I have a degree in computer science. I ended up getting a PhD. But my professional career didn't actually start. It started earlier. So if you fast forward from that little episode where I decided I was going to be a computer scientist, all of a sudden, one day the phone rings at home. And my mom calls me and says, there's someone on the phone. Look, I'm in the 8th grade. I don't get phone calls. So there's this person at the other end that says, do you know computers? I have no idea who he is. And, when you're in the 8th grade, what do you say? You're sure, because I had one for a couple of years. Well, I need you to write me a program. I was like, that was his language, a program. Well, like today we talk about software, but at the time that was what he wanted. It turns out that he knew my uncle. And he was looking for someone who knew computers. So my uncle pointed to me, and I was in the 8th grade. What this gentleman wanted, he owned a transportation company. He was also raising pigeons as a hobby. Pigeons. That's the thing, right? Pigeon raising. And he wanted someone to write him a program to calculate the result of a pigeon race. Because he was tired of doing it by hand. If you think about it, you drive a pigeon somewhere, you release it, and then it flies home to its roost. And then you have to calculate how fast did it fly. That's a geospatial computation. He was so tired of doing that by hand. So he needed someone to write him a program. So he hired me. to write a custom piece of pigeon raising software. So I got paid in the 8th grade for basically developing a piece of software to calculate the result of the pigeon race. And then I cornered the pigeon raising software market in Denmark. There were 4 clubs that were doing pigeon raising. I sold this piece of software to all of them. So that was the beginning of my professional career. The gentleman did own a transportation company. So when he figured out that I could actually code, then he started wanting me to write software for his transportation company. One of the things he wanted me to write, I mean, I wrote invoicing software, a whole bunch of stuff. He wanted me to write a salary system for his truck drivers. That was my first life lesson. If you're writing a salary system for truck drivers, do not get the salary computation wrong. So I had a little episode where there were 3 truck drivers, a little bit larger than me. At that point in time, I was in the 10th grade. And they came into the office and said, "Where's that Klaus dude?" What did I do now? It turned out I made a little bit of mistake in the calculation. And it was the wrong way. If they'd gotten too much pay, they probably wouldn't have complained. But they didn't get one of the extras they were supposed to get. They were slightly angry. So you learn something about quality assurance. It's like, test your shit before you let it loose to people that are bigger than you and might get angry, and you possibly could get beaten up. So it was very clear that I shouldn't do that again. So I started writing software professionally, actually, before I was ever done in high school. It was a little bit unusual, and it was very early. So these days you will find people that do that, but in the day, it was not typical. So I go on with my plan. I get to college, I get my undergrad, I get my graduate degree, I do a PhD, computer science. And you kind of think that you're going to have this academic career because that was what you could do with PhDs at the time. Right? Stuff happened in my family. I had to go out and get the job. In hindsight, that was a great thing because I very much enjoyed the career that I got. But the funny part is I couldn't get one because everybody looked at my PhD and said, "Well, I'm sure you don't want this job." So the second life lesson there was you're going to have to learn how to sell yourself. So how do you actually write a job application that says, no, I'm actually like really serious. I want this job. Like, don't assume that I'm going to go off and right into the sunset and be at university somewhere. I really want this job that I'm applying for. So you sort of had to learn how to write an application that made it clear that this is why I want this. But by the way, it's probably the best advice you can give anyone in terms of how you write a job application. Be super clear on why you want this job. Not the other 17 jobs that are sitting right next to it that you might want to take. So life lesson number 2. So I got a job doing computer, software development for the largest bank in the country. Life lesson number 3 had to do with the fact that sometimes end users do interesting things. We had a little case where there was a employee in the branch office in Copenhagen that was running credit card slips. That was when you had credit card slips that were on paper. So you run them through basically a reader, and it would sort of read these credit card slips and try to automate as much of it as possible. So you didn't have to type everything in. There's a checksum on these sort of piles of, because it's a bank, right? So the accounts have to balance. So there's a checksum on this batch, but you still have to put the right debit on the right accounts. Right? So you run all these credit card slips through, and then the piece of software we were working on would say, "Hey, does it all add up or not?" There was a small discrepancy, on one of these, but hey, the person that was running the batch was in a hurry to get home. Click the button to say, "Hey, yeah, okay, that's fine. We'll accept the discrepancy. We'll fix it on Monday." 2 a.m., the national payment clearing in the country came crashing down.
Whoa.
Oops. Turned out that they had accidentally typed the credit card number into the amount field. That's 16 digits. And so there was a credit card payment that was going against the 3rd largest bank in the country. It didn't have $733 billion or however much it was came out to. So they went bankrupt overnight. And when one of the clearinghouse banks is bankrupt, you can't run the clearing. So what does that teach you? People will do insane things if the system doesn't stop. Like, you would think that you wouldn't approve $733 billion of discrepancy, but someone did, and it says, "Oops." So I fixed it because we found out what the problem was. But there are some lessons you can learn from these kinds of events. So what happens next is I became the go-to person for the bank I worked for. So I wasn't afraid of taking on whatever they needed to do. You know, need to be a technical quality manager, sure. Need to run a UX team, sure. Right. Need to go take responsibility for security for a while. That was before CISOs were a thing, sure. Take on the responsibility for building a system that can connect the mainframe to a web browser. Sure, why not? I mean, this was in 1997. So that's the other piece of advice I give people is, don't be afraid of taking on things that may not seem like it's right up your wheelhouse and you're not quite sure where it's going to lead. Sometimes it leads to good things. There's a famous Thomas Edison quote out there. I don't know whether you know it. He said, "Opportunity is missed by most because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work." That's a great quote. So you become the go-to person, and one day the go-to can you go do was I get called to the executive offices. I was a known entity because I was the go-to person, and said, "Hey, we need a favor. Okay, what do you need this time?" Because it wasn't the first time. We needed to be our new chief architect / CTO, and I said, "What's that?" "We have no idea. We went to a conference. That's your job now." Because I was the go-to person. So I had a CTO's office / chief architect team consisting of one person, me. So you figure it out. You start building, tools, content. You start, building up a team. You hire some folks. You define what the job looks like, and you think everything is great. Yeah, no, it wasn't, because people started making really bad decisions. Right? Why would you make that decision? I mean, it gives you a recursive loop that will never end. It will take like forever. The performance will be terrible because that's what the method told me to do. But and you get to that point, and this is really, if you think about the pivotal moments in my career, there's like 5 of them. This is the first one. You start having to make a decision, right? So you can react and say, how can you be that dumb? I mean, it's like, really, it was not a smart decision. If you're a good engineer, you should not do what you just decided to do. You know what? That's the instinctive reaction by a lot of people. You start thinking about it. Is it really their fault? Or did you miss something? Because they basically thought that they were doing what they'd been asked to do. So if you have the fundamental belief that, look, people work not just for a living, but they work because they want to make a difference, most people do, you have to assume good intent.
Yes.
And if you assume good intent, you have to start reflecting on, what did I do wrong? And what I did wrong was I forgot the people. I had the tools, I had the process, I had the method, and I got all the stuff that you were like, it should work. But if you don't help people think differently and learn, it will not. So what I missed was the education, the learning program, the thing that taught people how to think differently about architecture. And this is where I could say the rest is history, because really the rest of my career became helping people and organizations change. So I fixed it, which meant I had a certain amount of credibility. It would have booted me out because I kind of screwed it up. So I fixed it. We went through, 5 large acquisitions. That teaches you something about organizations and whatnot. We had a great architecture team. We were basically pursuing a platform strategy before platform strategies became a thing. And you fast forward to, something like, we're now in 2007-ish. And my wife, whom I love dearly, knows me very well and said, "You don't seem as excited about your job anymore." I'm like, I've been doing this for 7 years. I've been with the bank for 12. It's like, I don't know what's going to come next. And she said, "Why don't you find another organization?" So you got to be really clear on what you're looking for. I didn't feel like working with smaller problems. That was where I was at that point in time in my career. I was like, no, you know what? No, not really. What ended up happening was, well, we decided to try to get a job in the U.S. Why would you try to get a job in the US? Because what's the point in going to Sweden or Germany or the UK? I mean, they're slightly bigger ponds, but if what you're looking for is big problems, go find a big environment to find big problems. So these kinds of changes don't happen by themselves because you can't just say I'm in Denmark and I'm a C-suite in Denmark. Hey, I'd really like to jump to the US. That's not how it works. So I reached out to my network and some people I knew in IBM and said, here's the deal. Kind of like to get a job in the US. It'd be really nice if it's permanent. You sort of need to help me get a work visa. So how about it? And they said yes. So I quit what was a good, cushy, safe executive job and went to do something completely different in a very different environment. I took two demotions actually to take that job because it was what I wanted to do. So I spent 7 years with IBM answering a very simple question. I have all this technology, now what? And you can see the threat through because my whole realization back in 2002, which was forgot about the people. Right? There is a whole business and people side around the technology, which is the so what. So I spent 7 years helping people with the so what. And sort of my second aha moment in my career was when I was like 4.5 years, 5 years into my IBM career. I stayed there for 7 years. One of my good colleagues, and we were traveling, said, "Hey, you know what, Klaus, you're being stupid." Wasn't used to that. I was like, why would you not be nice to me? Yeah, look, we got a good relationship. We're working together for a long time. So we were sitting having a drink. Why would you do that? No, she's just being stupid. Apparently I am because I'm not getting it. I mean, it's like, come on, what's happening? Because you tell people, the whole truth. But come on. I mean, that's my job. I'm the expert. I tell people the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Yeah, that's why you're being stupid. Well, what do you mean? You scared them. Oh, I was being stupid. Because by telling them the whole truth, by overwhelming them with all the stuff that I knew, it's kind of scary. And if you get really good at something, then you can throw so much information in people's face and you can be so comprehensive in terms of all the things that are good and bad that it becomes a little bit scary and they will respect you forever, but they may not want to talk to you again. So never lie, tell the truth and nothing but the truth. But sort of my second career lesson was dose your truth and don't always tell everybody the whole thing. So this was when I decided to become a storyteller because it was one of those moments where you got to decide what you're going to do next. My decision was I'm going to start telling stories instead of giving people facts. Now there are all kinds of reasons why that's a good idea if you want to drive change, but it was that in your face, you're being stupid kind of statement that led to me taking a different path in my career than I otherwise would have. So that's like another fascinating thing. I was pretty good at helping people figure out the so what. One of the companies that I helped with the so what was Edna. And they were about to spend like $100 million, chop of change, on building out the next generation platform for the Affordable Care Act. I mean, that was back in, if you look at it, it was in 2000 late 2014. This legislation had just come to be in the US. It is about the public exchanges. You can get health insurance on a public exchange now. And everybody had 12 months to implement that. So talk about time pressure, because when you file with the federal government, it's like you said you would. So this whole thing about being late is not a thing. When you said you would, you were going to do it, or bad things are going to happen. So, Mick McCarthy, who's the then COO and CIO, she ran like half the company, wanted to know whether they were on the right track. So I was the so what guy. So we talked about it. Ended up with a readout, on the sixth floor in the Aetna headquarters in Hartford, Connecticut. And never met her before. I worked with her team. I've done the due diligence on are they on the right track. And then Meg starts the meeting with, I don't want to talk about the report. And I'm like, oh, I just drove 2 hours to get to Hartford. I doesn't want to talk about the report. I want to know what she wanted to talk about. She wanted to talk about it. So what? So what are we going to do about it? So very lively conversation. And along the line, she starts talking about, wanting more of my time, go talk to some of the IBM executives to get more of my time. And I don't know where it came from. She started talking about, needing a new CTO. Uh, so I asked on the way out of the room and ended up with her and me being the last two people leaving the room and said, hey, Matt, I don't know, we don't know each other that well, but that CTO, chief architect thing, what was that about? Well, she was about to push the button on a search for a new CTO. And then she asked me point blank, so are you interested? You can't blink. Because if you don't reply confidently yes within 3 seconds, you are not interested. So if you want to learn something from that, it is the decisiveness when the moment arrives, right? So yeah, opportunities missed by most because it's just snowballs and looks like work. But you also have to recognize the opportunity like that and then make up your mind as to whether that's something you're going to pursue or not. So I said yes. And 3 days later, she gave me a job offer. So I met her on a Friday morning, and Wednesday at noon, she gave me a job offer. So I got into healthcare. Went through a whole bunch of stuff, with Bang Humana, that didn't happen. The Department of Justice blocked it, so that was complicated. It got bought by CVS Health. So we were now the people getting bought. And there's a whole dynamic around that. I mean, I was the technology lead in the whole acquisition process. But you always end up in a scenario where, so who's going to get the CTO job in the combined company? And this is where you need to tell the story of you and why you feel that you would be the right person for the job. So it's really about sharing your vision for what does it mean to be the CTO for a $250 billion company with 300,000 employees and the largest or second largest healthcare conglomerate in the country. I ended up getting the jobs, so that took me from CTO of Aetna to CTO of CVS Health, which is a Fortune 5 company. And for most people, you made it. I mean, you were like, this is amazing. Man. You're the CTO for a Fortune 5 company. And then I quit. Seriously, why would you do that? Because Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center needed a chief digital officer to try to figure out how to combine digital and technology. And I'm purpose driven. So, what's a more noble purpose than trying to make cancer care better? So, I left. I left the Fortune 5 CTO job, went to places where high tech talent usually don't go on the provider side, and started working on how can you make cancer care better across research, the whole education part, and then obviously Spectacular Care is a top 3 cancer center in the world. And then COVID hit. Like 3 months after I joined, the mayor of New York shut down the city. Wanted us to continue to run the hospital. Talk about stressful. Send home 40% of your staff. You get 48 hours notice. We still want you to run the hospital. So you can lean into the change, or you can hunker down and be defensive. If you listen to my story, I'm not the person that hunkers down and stays defensive. Lean into the change. We, being the entire leadership team, we made a lot of change in 2 years. Virtual care became mainstream for us and for others. We did crazy things like taking meeting rooms and turning into impromptu call centers, ran wires along all the floors because we didn't have enough people. We ran out of phone circuits to forward the phones because everybody called forwarded the phones. We didn't have enough network bandwidth because the telcos couldn't prioritize the healthcare traffic over gaming traffic. It was just crazy times. I walked down Fifth Avenue in the middle of the day and there was like no one. No bicycles, no pedestrians, no cars. Like, look half a mile in both directions, there's just no one. Which never happened. So it's like a disaster movie for real. So it was like very stressful, but looking back at it, man, we get a lot done. And then it comes down to people and crisis management. So get to the other side of that and I left again. Because at that point in time, I had become very clear that my role in life was to lead transition and transformation. Like that was part of the introduction, so you're spot on. That's what I do. And I kind of made a career decision that said, when I get to the point where I can walk out the door, and things will be fine, I'll leave. I don't know whether you've ever watched a movie called Nanny McPhee, but it's the same thing, right? I mean, when the kids get to the point where they don't need her anymore, but they really want her to stay, she leaves. That became, part of my decision framework for how long I stay. If I've done my job, I can walk out the door and things will be fine. So I left and joined Teladoc Health because now virtual care was mainstream and they needed someone to rationalize two acquisitions and that just required Livongo and InTouch and figure out how to drive high quality longitudinal care in a virtual setting. Nobody had done that before. So that's where I spent almost 3 years. If you want to think about scale, 92 million members have access to one or more services, 800,000 people under chronic condition management, 5 million visits per year. That's not counting the coaching sessions. That's just counting the actual clinical sort of, consultations. That's huge, man. And you think about it in a world where the only interface you have is digital. So that's a very, very different business, and you learn a lot about behavior, experiences, data analytics. How do you optimize all that? Simple question like, so you have an SLA that says you have to deliver a physician consult within 30 minutes or less. How do you know how many physicians you're going to need in Kentucky next Sunday? Because if you don't have enough, you can't meet your 30-minute SLA. If you have got too many, they're not working. That's a bad thing. So it's a fascinating, multi-dimensional analytical problem that you could throw machine learning after it. So that's just one example of what it means to operate at that kind of scale on an ad hoc, responsive fashion. So I did that for almost 3 years. Got to the point where, I can walk out the door. It'll be fine. So I quit. Uh, and I thought I was going to retire because I'd started doing, board roles. I was doing some advisory work, including for a couple of UK companies, just trying to take 25 years of experience and share it. Because I found a passion for helping people grow. The whole learning thing, I guess, is a little bit in my DNA. And it was just, I'm 56 now. I turned 55 at the time. And it felt like a good time to settle into just giving people advice. So I retired. I was retired for 9 months. I just unretired 2 months ago. And I was happily retired, but I got another one of those unique opportunities where, Austin is the 11th or 12th largest city in the US, 3 million people. It's the largest city that does not have an academic medical center. So we're going to be building one. And tying it directly into the ecosystem, integrating strongly with the larger University of Texas Austin campus, and trying a whole bunch of differentiation in education, in research, and what care looks like. So we'll be building out from the ground up, a new academic medical center in the age of AI and post-COVID, which will be very different than anyone has done before. So that was the very long version of how to get here and a few delightful lessons that came along the way.
It's a beautiful story, and it's no surprise that you describe yourself as a storyteller with an ability to tell a story like that. So I have a few questions, and I've tried to write down a few notes here to pull this into a really nice, succinct question, but you're going to have to bear with me because this has got a few ideas baked within it. There's something about your career that ever since you were in 8th grade and ever since you had a skill that was of value to a company or a person, since that moment, you've always been, I'm going to describe it as ahead of the market in something. You've always had something to teach the market. At the beginning, it was coding and it was creating a program. And latterly, it was how to fix a $733 billion tech issue in a bank and all that sort of stuff. But it started with a skill. It started with learning a skill. It started with being going very narrow and deep. It wouldn't be described as that now in computer science, but going very narrow and deep in this thing that was probably quite quirky at the time, and actually certainly not what most people are doing, and that sort of contrarian nature, or maybe it wasn't even contrarian nature, or just ability to find the passion and follow it enough so to learn a skill that was of value, that was basically the catalyst from the beginning. Now, the other thing I just want to pull in here, though, is that you describe a career of really experiential learning. You were learning through doing, you were learning through failing, you were learning through watching things fail, creating it, being deployed, it happening and failing and causing this, and you go in and fix it. And there was a lot of sort of trial and error almost, or learning by experience, frankly. I think in the modern world, maybe it's just in computer science because it's more mature now, whether it's in coding and technology, and maybe that's more so. But I actually see a mirror in medicine here, because my generation might be a bit of an in-between one, but we certainly felt this way at the time. I know it's a lot worse for the people coming through in medicine now, that you don't have that opportunity anymore to learn medicine experientially. You know, the generation above me talked about, you know, you would just try a drug, see if it worked. You know, if really bad things happen, you'd sweep it under the carpet. You'd be, you know, quite interesting with how you wrote notes and all these sort of things. It didn't really matter. Now, because of systems and processes and attention and all sorts, everything is so much more get it right first time. And because of that, people sit in fear. And because of that, I think there's been a shift of the younger generation to not come in and explain what they can offer. They come in and explain what they can learn from you because they want to be perceived as coachable. And actually, that's the most important thing. And I see this at SomX, our communications and creative agency. People write job applications to sound as coachable as possible, talking about everything they will learn. They very rarely lead with what they can offer for the most junior roles. And I have a lot of sympathy for that. It's frustrating, don't get me wrong, because actually as a business owner, I'm actually looking for people that come in and help. But I think there's a real shift in the world that careers like yours would almost be seen as cavalier at this point, or certainly like very different, to sort of learn a skill. Think as a young grad, you could teach a company anything. And I don't know, it's a really interesting shift in the world. But you talk a lot about people and, you know, forgetting the people and that and the other, and you talk about teaching a lot. So you teach peers, and you certainly have in your career, but you must also teach a younger generation too. You talk about academic institutions and things. So I'm just interested in how you see that change in the world, whether you agree with me or whether you don't, or and when you think that's a good or a bad thing, or how young people now can actually navigate this, because I actually think it's really difficult.
It is difficult. I don't know whether it's more or less difficult than it was just back in the day. I think it's difficult in a different way. And part of it is our world has become more specialized.
Correct.
I actually think the same dynamic to a fairly large degree plays out just in a more specialized space. But what becomes fascinating is when you're in a more specialized space, it's not that the trench isn't there, but your playing field is out of the gate unless you start crossing specialties. Your first playing field is probably smaller than it was 30 years ago. It doesn't mean that the totality of everything we're doing, this multidimensional playing field, is smaller. It's probably bigger and richer than it was. But the slice you see is by definition out of the gate more narrow until you get to a different kind of log. That's some of the ones I've had lately. What's fascinating about that is I think it proves the whole point about it being about people. Because how do you break the mold of I'm put in the scenario, my field is narrow? I think there's three things you can do. The one thing you can do is you can have a learning mindset. You can continue to build connections. You can go out of your way to not be narrow yourself. There's this whole notion of being a versatilist that one of the big, analyst companies coined some years back. IBM would have called it being T-shaped, But what you add when you're choosing to be a versatile mind is you always challenge yourself in what's the next thing to learn. Like if you look at the undercurrent, and you diagnosed my career, pretty much spot on the money. But I was always open to learning something new. That didn't go away. Right? Just because we're living in a world that is more specialized out of the gate doesn't mean that this whole idea about being 3 clicks deep on a lot of things and then having a couple of very, very deep areas went away. There is still absolutely value in being 2 or 3 clicks deep on a lot of things. Because you know what? In a highly specialized world, the people that have the language to cross boundaries will succeed. You don't necessarily need to have deep expertise in everything, but if you know enough to be a credible conversation partner with the clinicians, with the technology team, etc., you will do well. One of the biggest compliments that I feel I can get is, when I left Teladoc, I had one of the infrastructure leaders say, Klaus, I'll miss you because you get us. I haven't touched infrastructure in years, but it still takes an interest in what that team does, and I take pride in understanding enough to know what's the latest and greatest in network thinking, what's the latest and greatest in virtualization of servers. And that's all it takes. Take an interest in someone else's area of specialties. That's the one thing. The other thing is be really clear on what's important to you in a job. And no, it's not what's the next title you want. And it's not how much money you make. What truly makes you feel like this is a great place to go to work and you love what you do? Look, there's going to be good days and bad days. We all have bad days. I've had plenty of bad days in my career. But there's this inner satisfaction that makes you feel like something is worth doing. What that is to you, the only person who can answer that is you. And we don't spend enough time thinking about it. So when I take on people in a mentoring relationship, that's the first question I ask. What's really important to you to feel satisfied? Not happy, just satisfied with what you do. There's going to be moments where you aren't happy. What makes you feel satisfied? The second question is harder. First one is hard. The second one is harder. What is the special something you bring to a job? It's not your skill. I had an executive coach that asked me when I worked for Aetna, and you got to remember, when I worked for Aetna, I like 15 years in the C-suite, and I didn't think an executive coach could teach me anything at that point in time. Yeah, you're a little bit arrogant when you've had as much success, and then you get taken down a notch, and you become humble again. She asked me a very simple question: "What's your value statement?" And I thought I knew. My value statement is I turn vision into action. That's what I do. And she smiled in her own wise way and said, "That's a great slogan. I love it. But it's not your value statement." Now, what do you mean? That's the value I bring. No. That is what you do. It is not the value you bring. Now tell me, what's the value you bring? What makes you special? And she wanted me to boil it down to one sentence. I took it to heart, so I just wanted to boil it down to one word. That's hard. If you are to find a single word that describes the special value you bring to the table, no matter where you go, no matter what you do, it took me 6 months. And I got a lot of help from people that know me well. And I didn't actually come up with the word myself. It came from someone that had worked with me for 3 years. And no. You're not an orchestrator, because I tried orchestrator, organizer. I had lots of words in that family, which was sort of putting things together. And she said, "No, you're not an orchestrator. You're a synthesizer." And she was right. That is who I am. And if you look at every single thing I've done in my entire career, the thing that has been common to all of them is I bring really good synthesizing skills. I have a knack for taking stuff that may not seem like it fits. Oh, this is the essence of all of these pieces. That's the synthesis of what it all means. And that is what it means to me to live in the intersection between the now and the future. And how I'm able to help bridge the stepping stones from where we are to. I know lots of people that may be better at vision than I am. I know lots of people that may be better at execution than I am. I'm not bad at either, but I'm really, really good at laying out the synthesized stepping stones of how we get from A to B.
It comes down to knowing yourself, doesn't it? And this is the thing. I think I liked what you said actually about versatility in a world of specificity and specialisms and hyper specialisms. Versatility becomes an asset in a world of a broad world of a lack of specialists. Obviously, being a specialist is of value there, and it seems that if the world has then shifted, as you say, from being a world of versatility to where specialism matters, and we've now changed into a world of hyper specialists, then actually we should be leaning into our versatility. I actually do relate to that just in my own career, because obviously medicine and is now a really interesting question. For me, it's medicine and marketing and creativity. Then all of a sudden, anyone who is medical or healthcare that wants marketing or creativity will come to us. And so the really interesting group are the medics and the computer scientists, for example, who can go on ward rounds and not only see problems, but they see solutions, the medics and engineers. And so we're deep on two things now being really useful. I almost feel like we're in a world, and I kind of, because I see who applies to us, we're sort of coming into a world where three things, the medic, engineer, who also is good at marketing. And then all of a sudden now that's the person who's going to get the job at the health tech marketing job. So like, it seems that three pillars is also becoming a thing now. And perhaps we move to 4, 5, 6, and all of a sudden the hyper specialism comes back. And maybe this is a continuum that we just keep going down. But I think it's really interesting. But to move on to some more health tech stuff. So I know that people is obviously something that is the thread that's running through your career here, and the understanding of people and changing anything to do with a company is largely going to be about people, and especially digital transformation and that kind of large scale transformational change is going to be so much about people. Now, one of the things that you've got a lot of experience in is being on C-suite and being on boards. And it's interesting to me because I think a lot of people have visions of their career ending up on the C-suite, but it is a pyramid and it gets very narrow at the top. You know, there aren't as many CEOs as there are account execs or that kind of thing. And so actually it comes probably partly down to knowing oneself and all the rest of it. But I want to actually talk about boards specifically, because there's health tech companies and biotech companies will raise some money. All of a sudden, they've now got an investor on their board. They might sit as chairperson of the board themselves if they're the founder. They might get a chairperson in just because they think that's the right thing to do. We'll just get a chairperson, and all of a sudden, you find your way with 3 or 4 people on a board, and now you're in a situation where you're having to do board meetings, and that's the situation you're in now. There's that versus, I suppose, a far more deliberate version of that, where someone more experienced might act a little bit differently and really try and influence the board and this, that, and the other. And I'm just interested in your career of being a board member. What have you seen in terms of the good, the bad, and what lessons do you have for health tech companies and health tech founders in putting a good board together?
That's a great question. Well, the first thing to just internalize is boards are messy by definition. And the reason they're messy by definition is you have to think about what is the role of a board. The formal role of a board is to provide governance. So what's governance? Well, the traditional definition is about decision rights. If you have a board that is all about decision rights, you got a bad board. You got to figure out how can you take governance and turn it to not be something about decision rights, but really be about stewardship. Think about the difference between those two words. Right? So it's the beginning of
help me understand that a little bit.
So governance is all about decisions and rights and authority and whatnot.
Yeah,
it tends to be confrontational by definition.
Yeah.
So that flavor of board governance, you're not going to have a particularly helpful board. They're going to be looking over your shoulder. They're going to want to approve certain things. They're going to want to have... Look, boards are noses in, fingers out. All good board members understand that. You're not management. but you can still show up in different ways. If you're a board that's all about governance and control and authority, bad board, especially for a startup. It's not helpful. I mean, for large publicly traded companies, it may be necessary. I mean, there are periods of time in the lives of companies where that's what you need. But for startups, for early stage companies, for mid stage companies, for growth companies, absolutely not. What you want is a board that are trying to be good stewards of the future of the company. The difference here is it's not about the decision. It becomes more of the learning, guiding, teaching. Yes, there is an undercurrent of you have a formal responsibility. As a board member, you can actually get sued. The reason that boards are focused on risk is you have personal accountability. It's why board insurance exists. You have personal accountability for the oversight you're providing to the company. So most people are like, bleh, how hard can it be to board? It's actually hard. You should not sign on to a board for something where you're not comfortable that this is a company that will stay within the realms of the law because you are personally liable for that company behaving nicely. You also shouldn't sign on to a board where you don't care about what the company does. Because if you sign on to a board because I just want the board title, you're over on the governance side and you're not going to be helpful because you're doing it for you. Yeah. Good mom members do not do it for me. They do it for the organization they choose to join. It is no different than taking a job. Look, being a board member is a job. It's not a full-time job. So everything what you said about feeling fulfilled, feeling like this is something I want to contribute my time for, as a board member, look for that. As a CEO, founder, whoever you are that has an influence on who gets to be on the board, and you do have influence, look for people that are like that, that actually care, that care about you, your team, your company, your mission, your purpose. If you get that kind of board, you can start building a partnership where there's the formal board operation that still has to happen because there is a steward, there is a corporate board sort of governance thing you have to do. It's part of what it means, but you get more. So it's an and. You also get somebody that you can bounce ideas off of. You get somebody you can ask unofficially, hey, I need talent so and so. What have you seen elsewhere? Or here's a crazy idea I have. What do you think? The board chair is a very special role because you actually have to form a strong partnership with the CEO and president of the company. So the board chair role doesn't begin or end in the boardroom. You can't cross the boundary to think that you're management. Don't do that because that's like terrible. And I've seen it happen. Right? Now you stop blurring the boundaries. But you can and you should build relationship, network, etc., with not just the president and CEO, but all the key people in the organization. And I have had cases where, especially in a startup setting, some portion of the C-suite might think, I just know for a fact that boards are not useful. And you just have to ask yourself, as a board person, especially as the board chair, whose role is it to change that? It's a really interesting question, right? Because you can say the problem is in the C-suite, or you can say, as a board chair, I haven't actually demonstrated to the C-suite why I'm useful. So it's a two-way street. I think good boards understand it's a two-way street, and they sign on to the board for the right reason. And as someone who influences board choices, board member choices, look for those kinds of characteristics. How was that to answer?
It was very good. It was very good. So going super practical now, you're a health tech founder. You've raised a seed round. You've perhaps raised a Series A or even raised a Series B. And you're starting to appreciate the value of more senior people to you, a tight group of more senior people to you that want to support you, and you want to put that group together. You know that when you raise money, there's going to be perhaps the lead investor is going to take a seat on the board, or there might be, board observers or this, that, and the other. Going super practical now, how does a health tech founder put that board together? What characteristics should you look for in those people that are about to come onto your board?
It's a really good question. It's obviously one that does not have a singularly correct answer.
Well, quite, yeah.
There's a lot of dimensions you could take, but I think there's a couple of pieces of practical advice. When it comes to your investors, be it seed, Series A, Series B, yes, they're going to expect to have influence on the company. What you should look for, and you should do that during the funding round, is make sure they have a conversation about not just who gets a board seat, but what is the expectation of what it means to be on the board. And make sure that whoever you take a funding round from understands the stage of your company. Because if you misalign, remember we talked about that spectrum from very governance focused large public companies to, you know what, no, this is more about stewardship because we're earlier. Make really sure you're aligned on where are we on that spectrum. Are we going to have a board that's more towards the stewardship? Are we going to have a board that's more towards the governance? Are we going to focus on the financials? Or are we going to focus on innovation? So you can have that conversation without it being confrontational. Just explore how are you thinking about board membership, and what are you going to bring to the table with the board member that you're going to be putting on. It's a very fair question to ask. It's not confrontational, and it will teach you something. The other thing that I strongly believe you should do, get professional help to find an independent board chair.
Interesting.
Independent board chair. Always. As soon as you get to being serious about being in the market, as soon as you get into some of these dynamics, you want an independent board chair. You do not want to have someone who's an investor or internally. You want an independent board chair. But you got to find the right one. And you probably don't know the right people. So get help. Yes, it's an expense. It's worth every penny you're going to pay for them. Not just what I've seen. Everybody that I know that have chosen some of the same, aspects of their career that go into board roles, many of them have been board chairs. They will all say the same thing. Independent board chair, get help. But there are firms out there that are really good at finding a great person. Can't say the right because there's like different things you can put into it. Finding a great person for your independent board chair. Now, you're going to have to work with them. You're going to have to be clear on what you're looking for. There's some chemistry that comes into play as well. You work well together because it's two in a box. I mean, the CEO and president and the independent board chair are two in a box. If you get the right person, that person will help you manage the board. That is what an independent board chair does. And that person will help lay out the procedures, the practices, inject more maturity than maybe the company would be able to at that stage on their own, and certainly clarify what's a management matter versus what's a board's matter. So that just that simple thing, to have someone who's an independent voice in the room, often completely changes the dynamic in the board meeting.
Should I, as a CEO, health tech, biotech company, should I, as a CEO, also be considering is acknowledgement of my own strengths and weaknesses, particularly weaknesses, important here? Should I be trying to hire a board that covers for my weaknesses or is aware of them? Should I be looking for people to double down on my strengths? Is it a mixture of all of these things? So, if should I be looking for someone that's likely to have a go at me, basically? Or do I want someone that is more likely, like that I know that I, as the larger shareholder, can control? I mean,
yep.
That's a tight rope to walk, right?
It's a tight rope to walk. Look, I've never been a CEO, so I mean, I just full disclaimer, right? I've been in many boardrooms as a board member and as a senior executive, but I've never actually been a CEO. If it was me, I would do two things to answer the question. I would actually split it. I would not think about my own strengths and weaknesses in terms of how I think about my board members, because you know what? That's a management matter. I would think about that in the context of how do I build my own C-suite, but I would keep that out of the board discussion. What I would do is look for how comfortable am I with what does good board processes look like? How experienced am I with that? If I'm not experienced, I'm going to need someone who can teach me what a good board process looks like and who's willing to put themselves out there to organize and structure the board. So am I looking for a board chair and board members that are willing to help me mature my board? Or do I already have the maturity in the board? And now what I'm looking for, I'm looking for board members that fill out the roster of what are the kinds of background that will provide appropriate stewardship of the company. So there's like a spectrum of things you can be looking for. If you're really early stage and you've never done a good board before, you kind of need to find people that will help you mature your board. And then over time, you will move into, I will complement the skills on the board and the backgrounds on the board with people that are filling out, like, for example, someone with a risk and cybersecurity background. It's a good thing to have on a board when you get to a certain size. Someone who has a commercial background, it's a good thing to have on a board when you get to a certain size. But initially, you're really probably looking for some versatilities that can help you get to what does your board actually need to look at, and especially the chair is important.
Yeah. Thanks, Klaus. Yeah, I thought I'd take my opportunity there for someone so experienced as you in boards, because I think it's something that it's something I get asked actually quite a lot by really early stage founders that want to do that sort of initial piece. And I think what you say about versatility there, and someone that's going to add the level of maturity, someone that's going to help you just put those governance and stewardship elements in place to the right balance, is obviously really important. So yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Now, having a lot of positions yourself and taking up a lot of positions and seeing the health tech world from a few different vantage points, many different vantage points over the course of your career, what are you, ask a broad open question to begin with, but what are you excited by at the minute? Are you excited about a particular technology or technologies? Are you excited about a particular buyer with buying power? Are you excited about a particular country? Are you excited about something else? Like what do you feel drawn to in health tech currently?
So I activate my synthesizer power because that's who I am. I don't actually think it's any one individual thing, but we live in this curious moment where, and you've seen it a couple of times, well, many times in world history, but a couple of times in the last century. All of a sudden, you get to this pivotal inflection point where all the stars align, all the pieces are in play, and you unlock something very different. I think the different thing we're going to be unlocking now is ambient healthcare solutions. It's almost science fiction become real. Right? It's this idea that we will create a personally and clinically intelligent environment where advice is at our fingertips, where we're being benevolently monitored on an ongoing basis. It's not creepy Big Brother, right? It is the helpers that are seeded into my environment and that will watch out for the bad things that might happen to me. That personalized learning journey, where I learn about me, my health, will prolong your life and give you a happier and healthier life. And the environment around you that ambiently looks for the moment where something happened and, hey, you need intervention or help. It's a very, very different model for healthcare, because historically it's up to you to decide when something requires attention, and then you go somewhere to get attention. Well, what if that wasn't the model? What if the environment we live our lives in was clinically intelligent enough to help identify scenarios where you need help and get the help in the context? That inflection point, I think, is going to change what care means fundamentally over the next 10 years. And it only happens because the inflection of sensors, wearables, intelligent algorithms, digital presence, and all the pixie dust you can wrap around it. That's the only reason that inflection point is even possible. 5 years ago, it wasn't possible. Now all the ingredients are there.
I'm interested in your thoughts on something to do with this, actually. I've been writing a talk I'm going to do in a couple of weeks, or editing a previous talk, I should say, that I'm going to do in a couple of weeks about some of the perhaps dystopian extrapolations of this. And one thing that I'm looking at is, in this ambient environment, and let's play this out. Let's say this ambient environment, there's just one massive Wi-Fi cloud over the entire world, and this ambient environment is literally everywhere. I wonder if that's actually a slight restriction on freedom. and we lose some freedom, the freedom to act unknowing of consequence. And I wonder if we will look back fondly at the time where you could drink a pint of beer without seeing in real time the amount of life you have decrease by 0.x or 0.n or whatever of a year, because you've had that, and you then don't have to do the maths in your head or have the experience of knowing just how bad things are. And I just wonder if that is, if this is the answer. I wonder if there is too much information that we can have, if we can be aware of too much
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we can. I mean, if you go back to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, don't always tell people the whole truth.
Right. Interesting.
You tell people the truth and nothing but the truth. That the pattern persists. It has to be by choice. So when we say personalized, it's not just personalized in the conscious. It's the choices we make in terms of what we want to be consciously aware of versus, keep that in the unconscious. I really don't want to know. So it's like, when you're awaiting a baby as a couple, you decide, do you want to know the baby's sex in advance? Yes or no? It's a choice. And we have learned to respect the choice that you get to choose whether that's something you want to know or not. This is not novel in healthcare. Look, I mean, some people want to know, what's my prognosis? I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. Some people are like, I don't want to know. Help me deal with the pain. I just want to live the best life I've got left. Other people want to go aggressive into treatment, and they want to explore every single avenue, right? Because that's how they feel about it. And they want to know everything, right? And they use the rest of their life trying to learn that, and maybe to live a little longer. Look, 2 years in a cancer center, I've seen the sad stories, and I've seen the beautiful moments where people manage to transcend the disease condition. I think we need to give each other choice on what do you actually want to know. But if you want to know, give me a scenario where it's not in my face, and where I can choose to have intelligent monitoring around me. Look, if I was ever diagnosed with diabetes, I would want a continuous glucose monitor, because I know that I will live longer. It is less intrusive. And hey, I want an insulin pump because I don't have to worry about whether I'm going to inject the right amount of insulin. So that's my choice. But if somebody else chooses to say, I don't want to deal with it, I'm going to live my life my way, stay away. That should be okay. Right? So we should respect the individual choice in terms of how much you want to know. For most of us, if you can create a benevolent experience, I would want it. For the thing that would keep me healthier and happier. But there's going to be people that choose not to. So I don't have a better answer, man, because the big brother is watching you scenarios where you don't have choice. That's not where we should go. We should give people personal choice. But with choice, I don't see any way this can be a bad thing.
There's a really interesting report written recently about we put it in our newsletter. I can't remember the title of it now for the life of me, but it was sort of like a thought experiment of widespread genetic testing, and what if you gave an entire country widespread genetic testing and then reorganized healthcare around the results. And it's such a fascinating thought experiment of, you can learn everyone's genetics, you can see the disposition to various conditions, you can look in advance and economically reorganize care around all these things. And this sort of utopia versus dystopia nature of this as a concept. But it's interesting what you talk about with choice, because, in a world where that is possible, you then throw in choice, and then all of a sudden it creates an interesting world, right? And I still don't know whether we are heading to a world in health tech that we almost want to put the brakes on and go back to a different time, make some different decisions, because we're trialing and testing AI, and you'll have seen this in all the companies you're part of. We're trialing and testing AI in so many places. We're trialing and testing it in the back end, doing stuff that's not seen on the clinical ground floor. We're doing it to count the numbers of cells and things and stage things in pathology, and it's speeding things up there. We're using it in radiology to spot like things in scans that people don't see, but we're also using it in AI mental health chatbots, and we're trying it talking one-on-one to people as a replacement for talking therapy. And I personally, I'm interested in your views. I don't feel like we've done a sort of a philosophical exercise here to figure out where we want AI and where we don't. And that's not because I'm anti it. It's actually because I'm so pro it. I don't want technology somewhere where all of a sudden we think, I wish we hadn't done that. Because you can't really go backwards. You can't go backwards once you introduce AI and it solves a problem economically.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle. No.
Correct.
The conundrum we're facing, and you see it in regulation as well, is innovation is happening so fast and furiously now that any prescriptive or descriptive approach to guidance will inevitably be behind. Yeah. So you can't take the prescriptive or descriptive approach. That it won't work, because you will basically forever be running behind the art of the possible, and all you're creating is tension.
Interesting.
So if you want to do it, and I think we should, I think it has to be ethically and value based, and I think you need to give people tools to apply freedom of thought in the context of an ethical set of guidelines. If you remember all the way back to one of my first life lessons, I screwed it up because I forgot the people component.
Yes.
But I can't control it by telling people what the right thing to do is. I have to help them learn, make their own judgment calls.
Yes.
It's this curious thing where I just don't think that regulation, prescriptive, descriptive guidelines is going to get at what you just said without stifling the innovative thought that is a fundamental part of human nature. So it has to be, the ethical, value-based approach. And I have to respect the fact that people can make bad decisions. I will course correct if and when people make bad decisions that impact other people. I also believe in personal freedom. If I want to make the decision to do something stupid for me, I should have the right to do so. I should not have the right to do something stupid for other people. That is where value-based and ethical-based guidelines come.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As you were talking there, one thing I hadn't actually thought about is, where you do have a document, a prescriptive document with a set of rules, all of a sudden you're starting to rule by fear, and all of a sudden you're trying to say, well, now there's going to be consequences if you do this, this, and the other. You're creating a source of rebellion. You're creating a place where people are always going to then ask questions. What if? There's
going to be some things that obviously don't kill people. That's like just by rule. But there's this whole in between gray area where everything has to be value-based.
On the route to this, ambient healthcare, we've seen things like Neko Health now, very sort of Star Trek-y. We're going to scan you and then we're going to tell you what's wrong with all these things, and starting to become an actual reality. What are the next problems that you think are going to be solved by this ambient nature? Is it more sort of clinicians, documentation, workforce, much better environment, and that accelerates and catalyzes change elsewhere? Is it more of a patient? Is it more for patients that will end up more preventative and more community-based care? Like, where do you see like the advantages of this hitting first?
The more obvious ones are continuous patient monitoring. It's such a bad term, right? But this whole notion of remote patient monitoring, which is I get telemetry from the environment that tells me whether a condition is well managed or not. That's an obvious one. And we're already going down that path. So that's going to continue. And we're going to get more and more advanced. The other place it's going to happen is relieving the administrative burden of the healthcare system. that's going to happen. And whether that's, ambient scribing, whether it's I'm going to be, speaking out my order set or whatever we end up coming up with, right, as to way to do it. And I think the third place is going to happen is personalized learning. This whole notion of how do I learn about my clinical condition my way, right? Instead of just giving me a single sheet of paper that says this is what you should know. No, actually give me the ability to learn in my environment at my pace and go as deep or as shallow as I want to do in terms of learning about what's going on inside my body. I think that's actually huge, right? Because the way we learn and behave has a much bigger impact on the health outcome than we like to believe it does. I mean, that's actually a big chunk of the outcome. So those three things. And what's interesting about it is they're not sexy. They're just meaningful, right, in their own right, and together they're very powerful. So this whole discussion about when can I replace the physician is really not the right question to ask, right? Because we know for a fact that trained professionals combined with trained algorithms will inevitably deliver a better outcome than either in isolation. So why even ask the question? It's not where we start, right? Because it's so hard to replace human judgment. Why even try when there's a lot of lower hanging fruit that we can go after?
Yeah, I hate the doctor versus AI articles. I think it's just awful. It's awful for the space, awful, because it will never be, as you quite rightly say, it will never be one versus the other. That's never a real or practical way that it will be deployed. It will always be humans using AI as a tool. The interesting one that you said was the third one, personalized learning. That's not an answer that's common. Most people say the first two. Personalized learning is the less common answer, which I think is really interesting. You obviously have a career of certainly respecting, enjoying, have a passion for teaching. You've seen firsthand the ability to, you're a storyteller, so you're talented in doing so, but clearly you know how to package a story to teach people something. You've done it at the individual level, you've done it at the company level, you've done it, one to many essentially, and, passing learning on. You actually get bored once you've done that bit and then you leave, which is really interesting. So is broadly the healthcare world your next target for this? Is this what you're trying to put together in, the companies that you're part of and the people that you're now working with? Is the patient, and I mean that in the broadest of terms, are they the next target of your passion in your career?
It's certainly one component of why I'm retired. I mean, think about the job I just took. There's an education component for the next generation of clinicians, and I think we can do that a lot better than we've done today. I think we can build a different care model that is much more individually centered, that's much more about the learning, not just about treating disease. So there is that. But then let's not forget the research, because if you weave together the other components the right way, you can make research an integral part of the healthcare ecosystem as opposed to sitting on the side. The traditional model is you've had a separation between care and research. You're separating, and there's still going to be basic research, there's still going to be translational research, there's still going to be clinical research. But I think technology has the opportunity to bring together the clinical science, care and research, the technology component, the behavioral science, the logistics, all based on a foundation of data science to create something that's magically different. And it will accelerate our learning and research. It will improve the way we teach the next generation of clinicians. It will absolutely give us more choice and better understanding of the human condition in our own bodies. So, yes. And what's better combining those three than a brand new academic medical center?
Absolutely. Could not agree more. In the largest city that doesn't have one, I believe you said earlier as well. Claus, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. We've covered a lot of ground there. Everything about your background and we talked about boards, we talked about where you see the healthcare world going. It's been a real pleasure. Do you have like a final either thought or call to action or something that you want to leave our audience with, perhaps a learning point throughout your career, or to perhaps even address one of the many learning points you've actually mentioned in the lists that you've done on this episode already? But I'm going to trouble you for one more, I guess.
I think I'm going to double down on know what matters to you. and
Yeah.
know what value you bring. I mean, that is probably the most fundamental aspect of my personal journey. I think the best advice we can give anyone. If you're clear on those two things, you'll make good choices for your career. And whatever's right for you becomes your career path.
I think that actually pulls together everything we've talked about. That pulls together your personal career and making good decisions on your career. Pulling it together a board and making sure you're surrounded by the right people in the management team. And indeed, making sure you're working on the right stuff that's going to satisfy and fulfill you in the health tech world. So, what a wonderful way to finish. Klaus, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. If people want to learn more about the work that you do, they want to learn more about the academic centre, they want to learn more about some of the companies you're part of, what's the best way for them to find out more or perhaps send you a little message?
I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. Well, I don't necessarily read LinkedIn messages every day. I certainly do at least a couple of times a week, mate. So I got a large network, always looking for more great people to get to know.
Awesome. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.